In Titus 2, older women are commanded to teach what is good so they can help younger women love their husbands and children. On today's show, you'll hear from older women who will share timeless, relevant biblical wisdom and personal, profound life experiences to help answer your questions and teach what God says is good so you can be the wife and mother you were created to be. Welcome to another episode of Older Women Likewise.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be back with you again. As some of you can see, I've had my hair cut, so it was fine over the winter time, but boy, Florida is hot. And so it really got hot. So I thought, well, if I'm pulling it back in a ponytail, I might as well just go ahead and cut it. So it's a pleasure to be with you again. As I say, enough of that. We are here at Older Women Likewise are pleased to have received permission from a shared inheritance to bring to you lessons that the ladies have prepared for Bible class lessons, ladies Bible class, individual study. Either of those is a great way to use these lessons. And this first one that we're bringing to you is a series on the book of Ruth that Lee Carter has prepared. And the first lesson was an introduction to the book of Ruth. But in this second lesson, Lee continues her lesson or her study in chapter 1 of the book of Ruth. She tells the story of Naomi and Ruth as they leave Moab to return to Israel, taking an intimate look at this small family during the chaotic times of the judges of Israel. This is a study not only in loyalty, but also in the transformative potential of God's law on the hearts of his people. Older Women Likewise thanks A Shared Inheritance for making this video available so that we can share it to you, our viewers, and you can find more materials that are available for women to women study. Find the rest of the series on asharedinheritance.com. Watch and listen to this series as I get it up on the screen.
Hi, I'm Lee Carter, and I'm here recording another lesson in the book of Ruth. So today we're going to pick up where we left off last time with the introduction and talk about the first chapter in its entirety. Just as a quick review, so we talked about the fact that this is during the time of the judges. We're obviously in the cycle of punishment because there's a famine. There's been a famine in Israel. And we're looking at the private domestic affairs of this little family of the tribe of Judah from the town of Bethlehem, Elimelech and his wife Naomi and their sons, and the fact that they have gone to Moab. While they're in Moab, the Elimelech dies, and both of their sons who marry Moabite women, Ruth and Orpah, also die. And it is when Naomi has lost her husband and both of her sons, and she hears that the famine is over in Israel, that she decides to return home. We talked about the fact that Moab was an enemy of Israel, and that it is curious, if not questionable, what the family is doing there to begin with, because there does not seem to have been a big community of Israelites who went to Moab. And so we don't know why they left. They left because of the famine, but the fact that they leave not just Bethlehem and not just Judah, but they leave Israel and they go to a place where it would have been the enemy territory, really, especially if this happens in the book of Judges around the time of Ehud. We talked about the fact that on their return home, they're traveling about a 30-mile distance, which doesn't sound all that far to us. It would have been a great distance on foot, probably would have taken them anywhere from a week to 10 days to make the journey. And that we have two women traveling alone. Again, there doesn't seem to be a mass migration back to Israel from Moab. They don't seem to have been other Israelites while they were in Moab. It would have been a dangerous road. This is the days of the judges where there was lawlessness. Every man did what was right in his own eyes. And we talked about the fact that that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody was doing wrong things, but the law of God was not the standard that it should have been. There would have been a river crossing, at least one, possibly two. And the fact that they're going to Bethlehem, which actually sits higher in the Judean mountains than Jerusalem does, means that they're also climbing up. The trip home is a 2,000-foot incline, which is significant, especially, again, Naomi has aged a decade while she was away. And so that would have been a complicated trip. We're actually going to begin with the first mention of God in the story. As they begin to return home, again, like I said, Naomi has heard that the famine has ended, and really there's nothing for her in Moab anymore. And so she begins to go home. Naomi receives word that the Lord, that Jehovah has ended the famine. And as the sole survivor of her family, she decides to return to Israel alone. She has endured a lot of suffering in the last 10 years. There's been a famine, a move to a foreign land, the death of her husband, and now the loss of her sons. As I said before, what's left for her here? She has no children, no grandchildren, no heirs. The family would die out, which is a great tragedy. We talked last time about Moab and Ammon are the sons of the daughters of Lot. And the reason that they get their father drunk and get pregnant by him is because it's a humiliation for the family to die out. And now that's going to be Naomi's lot. It's why Lot's daughters do what they do. It was a disgrace and a humiliation. It's a loss of home. It's a loss of identity. She has no one to care for her and help her as she ages. It's not likely that she'll ever marry again. It is natural, actually, for Naomi to be devastated. That's not a hard thing for us to understand. But her response to this devastation, to these tragedies, tell us something about her. When tragedy strikes, we're often so weary just from fighting the battles of day-to-day life that we forget who our refuge is. We forget where to run. We have to know who we are before the trials come. Think about Joseph. He always knew that God was working. He didn't understand it. He didn't know the plan. He couldn't have designed it the way that it happened. But he waits on God. When his brothers come and, well, they don't really apologize, actually, to him, but they do want to explain what they did. And Joseph stops them and says, listen, you meant it for evil. He doesn't cut him any slack, but he says, God used it for good. He can see that his life has gone the way that God willed it to go. Naomi isn't there yet. And sometimes, frankly, neither are we. We can see that Naomi believes in God. She believes in a God who controls the nation and controls her family, controls famine. But she's forgotten what else he can do for her or in her. She's forgotten mercy and patience and goodness. We can see this in her conversation with Ruth and with Orpah, with her daughters-in-law, who apparently at first they're going to go with her. It seems that they are already beginning to travel when she has second thoughts. Naomi has second thoughts and wants them to turn around and go back. The writer is going to devote half of the chapter to really what are going to become three speeches in this dialogue. In verse 8, Naomi tells the girls to return home to their mothers. She specifically reminds them of their family ties that they have in Moab. She prays that the Lord will deal kindly with them. This implies a loyal love and a kindness. And she prays that they will each find new husbands to take care of them. The three women weep and they cling to each other. Both of the younger women declare that they will go back with Naomi to her people. The use of your people indicates that both Ruth and Orpah know that they will not be accepted or welcomed with open arms in Israel. The Israelites are not the girls' people. They are Naomi's, and there will be prejudices there that Ruth and Orpah will have to deal with, and they seem to know that. They must have truly, truly loved Naomi, each other. These young women have no obligation to Naomi. Any ties that they had to her were severed when her sons died. Life in Israel for 3 widows, 2 of them who are Moabite, would have been harsh. Naomi's wish for them is that they'll have homes and security and provisions, none of which she can offer. Her first attempt fails. Her first attempt to get them to go home fails. And I wonder if Naomi was a little bit surprised at the intensity and the deep level of commitment and love and loyalty shown by these 2 young women. Their ties with Naomi run much deeper than the family ties that she tempts them with. And since neither of the girls are willing to leave her, Naomi appeals to their family ties and the future hope of marriage and children. And so she outlines the practical difficulties of this situation. She says to them in verse 11, "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Are there still sons in my womb, that they may be your husbands? Turn back, my daughters, go, for I am too old to have a husband. If I should say I have hope, if I should have a husband tonight, and should also bear sons, would you wait for them until they were grown? Would you restrain yourselves from having husbands? No, my daughters, for it grieves me very much for your sakes that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me." Naomi cannot provide for Ruth and Orpah in Israel, and the girls cannot argue with her logic. She has nothing to offer them, and she never will. There's no future marriage options associated with Naomi. They will remain widows, which equals destitution and poverty. And then she issues this final statement. "It grieves me very much for your sakes that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me." Naomi indicates that for some reason she has been disciplined by God. She attributes the deaths of her husband and her sons as God's punishment on her. And she says that her situation may negatively impact the girls. We see her bitterness here. She thinks God is against her. At this point, both girls make a decision. Orpah kisses Naomi and leaves, and Ruth clings to her. Ruth's faithfulness must have seemed unbelievable when contrasted with Orpah's really logical decision to return home. And so Naomi tries once more to get Ruth to leave her. She kind of says, "Why can't you be like your sister?" Right? And we see just how determined our Ruth can be. This is actually where Naomi kind of gets me. This is where it really, I think, what? I do believe that Naomi has faith, and I do believe that Naomi knows God. Obviously, she does. I just think she's so focused on her own suffering that she's lost her way. Look at what she says in verse 15. "Look, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." Return to your gods. I just don't get it. I don't understand. If you know who Jehovah is, and you know what he can do, and you believe that he has the power to bring famine and end famine and judge Israel and punish people and reward people and preserve a nation and redeem, why would you tell someone you love, obviously love, to return to a false god? I think Naomi is a typical Israelite who has forgotten God's power. She's forgotten his mercy. And I think Elimelech had too. In the end, the story's not really about Naomi. It is, but it isn't. The story is about Ruth. She is who God is looking for. And it is through her that he will bring his Messiah. Finally, Ruth interrupts Naomi. And for the first time in the story, we hear Ruth speak. Ruth obviously interprets Naomi asking her to leave. It's not an option. She sees leaving Naomi as abandonment, and she refuses. The profound sentiment of her words is indicated by the fact that she is very likely still clinging physically to Naomi. Her words at the end express a covenantal loyalty. This is something much deeper than an obligation. This is a sworn oath between equals. The only other occurrence of an oath that has the same language in the Old Testament is between Jonathan and David. When Jonathan swears to protect David and warn him about his father Saul's plans, because Saul wants David dead. And Jonathan now knows that he's not going to be king. He's not going to take his father's throne, but that God has decided that David is going to succeed Saul. And Jonathan swears this oath and asks David to swear it in return. Jonathan swears that he will tell David of his father's plans, and he asks David to swear that he will not kill off his descendants, the house of Jonathan, which, by the way, would have been politically a smart move by David to kill off anybody who had a claim to the throne. It would have been an accepted practice. Nobody would have questioned it. But this is the promise they make to each other. It's an oath that is binding, and it expresses an expectation of loyalty between two people who love each other. And we know, by the way, that David and Jonathan both kept their oaths. Jonathan warns David with the arrows in the field. And Jonathan's son is a member of David's household. The oath was kept. And Ruth will keep her oath as well. Ruth considers Naomi her family. This renewed loyalty changes everything for Ruth. In essence, Ruth pledges to be an Israelite. I was talking to my sister at one point when I was teaching these lessons before, and I know that this is, if you haven't listened to Elizabeth's Between the Testaments, she talks about this as well. But really, in those days, one of the things she was talking about is the fact that these cultures thought about gods and the fact that they were tied to the land. So when Israel took the land became known as the God of Israel's land among the Edomites and the Moabites and even the Assyrians. The people believed that the gods belonged to the land. And so it could be, we don't know how much Ruth knows. It could be that Ruth just takes the God of the new land in which she's going to dwell, and she doesn't really understand much about Jehovah in any kind of real spiritual way. The 10 northern tribes, when they were taken by the Assyrians, they take the Hebrews north to assimilate them into Assyrian culture, which they do. But when they want to repopulate the land and they want to farm the land and maintain it, some of the Assyrians and the Samaritans, which were there, and some of the Hebrews who have taken over the land, when there's famine and drought and other problems that arise, the Assyrians actually send some of the priests back. They send the priests back to appease the god of the land so that the land will then begin to produce. It's a very human idea. And so Ruth may not have actually understood a lot about Jehovah from Naomi. Her pledge to take Naomi's God as her God may be her accepting Jehovah as a condition of dwelling in this new land. However, what she does understand is that in order to do this, to go with Naomi, she has to leave her old identity behind. And she has to become something completely new. Her old alliances, whether they were social or religious or political, all of which, by the way, she addresses in these 2 short verses, they're discarded. They're gotten rid of so that they don't threaten this new relationship. This is the exact same thing we do when we put on Christ. Our previous ties are often broken. They have to be in order to protect this new relationship that we have, this new identity that is going to become who we are. There was a young woman who I've known since she was a child who came here from America a few years ago. She came, her sister and brother-in-law were living here, and she moved over. She left her life in America. She left her friends. She left her job. She left all of her social circles. She left her family, and she came here to center her life, to get her life back in order. It was going to be too hard to do it in that old environment. It can be hard. Now, we don't all have the luxury of up and moving. And it is a luxury to make that break. Because when we become something new, in some ways, we're still embedded in our old lives. We change, but our situation doesn't necessarily change. And that can be hard. I thought it was one of the bravest things I'd ever seen somebody do. Come and get themselves together. It was encouraging. It was a good lesson for John. And getting your life straight. I'm sure some of you have had similar experiences when you change and you're in the same place. And the people who knew you before don't understand the change that has taken place. And sometimes they complicate things. They make you second guess maybe what you're doing at some times. We have to cling to our Savior. We have to know to whom we cling. And when He becomes our rock, when we have a new foundation in our lives may not necessarily immediately get better, but we have peace and perspective. When we become Christians, our lives are not void of troubles and trials and tragedies. But just like Ruth clings to Naomi, we have to know to whom we cling. And we cling to our Savior, and His people will become our people. Regardless of culture or background or family ties or any other ridiculous thing that we use to divide ourselves. I often tell the women in Darmstadt, I have more in common with them than I do with the Americans who I work with. We have nothing in common according to the world's standards. They would not see any connection or commonalities between a woman from America and women of varying ages and geographic locations, but mostly African, Ghanaian. The world would not see any similarities between us. But I prefer them. They are my sisters. Because we have the very most important things in common. My father used to preach a sermon on the family of God. We had lived in Fayetteville, Arkansas when I was in high school, and it was one of those situations, hopefully, that you've all had, where the church was a wonderful mix of youth and energy and experience and wisdom. It was just a wonderful place. We loved those people, and they loved us. And it had been encouraging for me at a time when I needed it. I still didn't make all the right decisions, but it's not because people didn't try. The last Sunday we were there, before we left, he talked about what it means to be a part of this family. If you have to leave your mother, well, you can find a spiritual mother here. If you have to leave your father, you can have one here. You want sisters? Look around. What a blessing God gives us through his kingdom, through this large, extended family. You may have to leave your earthly family. They may not understand who you are becoming. But if you know who to cling to, I don't understand how, but God is going to make everything okay. I'm reminded of what Peter said when all of the disciples had left Jesus, and Jesus turns around and looks at his 12 and he says, "Are you going to leave too?" And Peter says, "Lord, to whom should we go? You have the words of life. There is none else." Ruth's commitment, her complete and total willingness to leave everything and go, that is what we do too. Our ties are to new people and new places sometimes. We are people without an earthly political allegiance. I am largely insulated from American politics, unless I talk to my son, who's interested in it somewhat and thinks it's funny is not the right word, but he watches it with for entertainment value sometimes. I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with being politically active, as long as we don't lose sight of the fact that our allegiances in this life are not about being American or Ghanaian or British or German or Indian or Canadian or Mexican or whatever other country you might be a citizen of by birth. Who the president is does not determine who I am. I try to pay attention as an American. I have the privilege of voting, and I try to pay attention and vote as responsibly as I can. But when we confuse politics with our spiritual warfare, well, then I believe we have lost the battle. My citizenship in this life has afforded me great advantages, and I work for our government, so I am not complaining. But it is not part of who I am. My spiritual outlook does dictate my political point of view on some things. However, I also think about the fact that in Ruth's time, God used political alliances and nations to accomplish his purpose and his will. And I think he does the same today. And I think if we think he doesn't, then we are kidding ourselves. We have to leave that too, at least to an extent, and take on new citizenship. We are citizens of a kingdom that has no borders, with a king who demands our allegiance. Ruth is a model of that. And so she says to her mother-in-law, "Stop asking me to leave. What's yours is now mine." For those of you who may not be American, in America, these verses are often read at weddings. Now, they are out of context, of course, but they are not inappropriate. And the poetry of them is simply beautiful. It is interesting also to think about the fact that in contrast to the Israelites taking on false gods, Ruth, the Moabitess, is going to take on the true God, Yahweh, as her God. At future points in the story, in fact, the writer is going to have to remind us that Ruth is a Moabite because she is going to become the model Israelite, which makes it possible for Boaz to take her as a wife. God's hand is on display in this young woman's life. And providence is a tricky thing. We don't know when it's working. And I suppose we can't ever be 100% sure about the way God has worked in our lives. But I will tell you that when I look back, especially in the years when John was in high school, if you have not had teenagers yet, those are hard years. When your children are trying to find their spiritual footing, I think back and I prayed that I would be enough, that I could get him through it. And I see the answers to my prayers. God moved people around, I believe, brought people here, put them in our lives. And I told John one day, I asked him, I said, have you ever thought about the fact that this was all about you? Maybe all of this, these people moving to Germany, was all about you. We don't know that for sure, but I believe it. Surely you can see your answered prayers too. Ruth must have seen her opportunity for change, possibly for redemption, and certainly for hope of a future. And so God uses that desire in her. He sees the nobility of her heart. Anyone can speak these words. I'm sure they're left in the dust of thousands of broken marriage vows, sadly. But Ruth is going to keep her promise. And finally, Naomi just stops trying. Ruth isn't leaving her, obviously. This humble young woman also has quite a will. She's very resolved. And Naomi apparently knows her well enough to stop insisting that Ruth return to her home. And so they take the journey. And when they arrive in Bethlehem, we see that Naomi had heard correctly. The barley is being harvested from the fields. Everyone in Bethlehem is excited to see them. They recognize Naomi. I think that's a really something for us to think about. It's the same community she left. Everyone didn't starve in the famine. They're not all dead. In some ways, they seem to be better off than Naomi is. Naomi tells them not to call her Naomi, to call her Mara or Mary, which means bitter. She says that she's empty, that although she went out full, she has returned empty. I don't think Naomi actually went out full. Certainly her earthly conditions were better in that her husband was alive and her 2 sons were with her. But she's missed the much larger point. She was empty when she left. The Almighty has testified against me and has afflicted me. She says this is God's doing. Isn't that interesting? You ever look at your life and think, why are you doing this to me, God? Naomi doesn't seem to accept any of the responsibility for her predicament. Now, certainly she may not be responsible for the deaths of Elimelech and her sons, but she's been away for a really long time. That was a choice that was made. I guess I just wasn't raised with a why me attitude. We were not allowed to do that in our house. And so I look around at suffering sometimes and I think, why not me? Why have I not suffered like some people do? I think every life has suffering and every life has hardship. But if that's what we focus on, then we have a problem. You know a good remedy for bitterness and self-centeredness? Service. Get to work doing something for somebody else. Study, teach, visit. Do you complain about what other people are not doing while you're also not doing things? I do sometimes. And I have to tell myself to stop it and start serving. If I'm serving, I don't have time to be bitter. At my nephew and niece-in-law's wedding, Harold Dowdy, who we called Uncle Harold, led the prayer. And he prayed that God would wear them out in his service. What a great thing to pray for a young couple. I have used that to pray for my son and his wife. Wear yourself out. You won't have time to be bitter or the energy. You won't have time to be worried about what everybody else is doing or not doing. And by the way, more than that, you won't care. Throughout my life, I have worshiped in a lot of different places with a lot of different people who have some of the saddest stories that you will ever hear. Growing up in third world countries with famine and disease and cultures that are unstable at best and dishonest almost by necessity. The things they've talked about, mostly not in poor, pitiful me kind of ways, just as in this is my life. They make me so grateful and occasionally ashamed. Naomi doesn't seem to consider what's happened in Bethlehem while she was away. These people, by the way, endured the famine. They stayed. And Naomi says she's empty. I'm thinking if I were Ruth, I'd also be thinking, what am I? I mean, here I am. And now you're empty. Naomi's bitter. She's so bitter that she's not grateful. The famine is over. She's made it home. Her daughter-in-law is devoted to her, but she's bitter. Even though things are looking up. When we forget to be grateful, we become bitter. The word bitter actually has a connotation that we have the inability or refusal to acknowledge anything good or the good in anything. Naomi doesn't see how merciful God has been. The theme of return is prominent in chapter 1. And in verse 22, it is also extended to Ruth. And this is important. She's not returning to Israel. There's no indication that she has ever been there before. It's not likely that she would have ever been in Israel. But God has extended his welcome and his protection to Ruth, even though she's a foreigner who's arrived in Bethlehem for the first time. Next, in the next section, we'll look at chapter 2, the women in Bethlehem, and we'll meet Boaz. So I hope this has been something that's been profitable for you and that you're enjoying, and I will see you next time.